There's a question that has quietly haunted theology since its birth. A question so simple, a child can ask it, and yet so devastating that no preacher, philosopher, or theologian has ever answered it without collapsing into contradictions. That question is, who made God? Religious belief often begins with a comforting explanation. The idea that everything must have a cause, that existence must begin somewhere, that there must be a first mover behind the motion of the universe. It's a tidy story. The world exists, therefore something must have created it, and that something must be God. It feels intuitive, almost irresistible. But intuition is not truth, as in stories are not evidence. If everything needs a cause, then so does God. If God does not, then not everything needs a cause, and the entire argument crumbles. You cannot have both. Either there is an infinite regress of causes, or there is at least one thing that exists without one. The believer simply decides that this special exception is their chosen deity. But this is not an answer. It's an escape hatch from logic, painted gold and sold as revelation. The idea of a first cause might sound profound, but it's built on an ancient misunderstanding of how reality works. Causation is a concept that exists inside the universe, not outside it. To speak of something before the universe is already to misuse language. Before implies time, and time is part of the universe itself. To ask what caused the beginning of time is like asking what's north of the North Pole. The question collapses into nonsense, and yet people cling to it because the human mind craves beginnings. We evolved to think in stories. Everything must have a start, a middle, and an end. The mind rebels against infinity. It doesn't want a reality with no clear origin. So, it invents one, a conscious being that stood outside of everything, said a few magic words, and made the cosmos appear. It's a narrative written to satisfy emotion, not to describe truth. But the modern understanding of the universe doesn't need such shortcuts. Quantum physics, for example, shows us that events can occur without a deterministic cause, that certain particles fluctuate into existence from quantum fields spontaneously. We've observed it. The universe at its smallest level behaves probabilistically, not mechanically. The notion that everything must have a cause is simply false. This doesn't mean science knows exactly how the universe began. It doesn't pretend to. But it does something religion never could. It admits the limits of knowledge. It leaves room for discovery rather than patching the unknown with mythology. God has always been the placeholder for ignorance, and every time we learn something new, that placeholder shrinks a little more. Consider this. Once, thunder was divine anger. Disease was punishment. The stars were gods. Then lightning became electricity, illness became biology, and the stars became nuclear furnaces. The divine retreated step by step, cornered by understanding. The same pattern continues today. When someone says, God created the universe, what they're really saying is, I don't know how it happened, so I'll stop asking. But asking is everything. The refusal to stop is what separates curiosity from worship. One leads to discovery, the other to obedience. The real danger of the question, who made God, isn't that it has no answer. It's that it exposes the illusion of having one. Throughout history, humans have worshipped thousands of gods, each declared eternal, each eventually abandoned. The Egyptians said the universe was born from the tears of Adam. The Hindus imagined Brahma breathing worlds in and out of existence. The Greeks pictured chaos giving birth to Gaia and Uranus. Every culture has its origin myth, and every myth once felt certain. Today they are all museum relics, yet each generation insists that their version is the final one, that their God alone transcends the flaws of all the others. But no matter how sacred the name, the question still returns. Who made yours? If existence demands a creator, that creator must exist, and thus must also demand one. If your God escapes that rule, why can't the universe itself? Why must the cosmos depend on a mind when the mind itself depends on a cosmos to exist? The more you think about it, the clearer it becomes. God is not an explanation. It's an endpoint, a wall that believers paint to look like a door. It feels like an answer, but it only hides the fact that there's no answer at all. The origin of everything may not be a who, it may not even be a why, it might simply be. The question, who made God, isn't merely a riddle about origins. It's a mirror held up to belief itself. Because when you follow the logic honestly, every path that begins with "God created the universe" leads to a dead end. Imagine a child asking, "Who made the creator?" The parent might reply, "No one made God. God has always existed." But that answer doesn't explain anything. It simply moves the mystery back one step beyond reach and demands silence. It's not knowledge, it's the surrender of it. Think about what that statement means. If something can exist eternally without a cause, why not the universe itself? Why not the laws of physics? Why must there be a supernatural mind instead of a natural process? The difference isn't logical, it's psychological. Humans have an instinct to personalize the unknown. When we don't understand something vast, we imagine it as a being, something with intentions, emotions, and will. That's how mythology was born. Early humans didn't know why the sun rose, so they imagined a god pulling it across the sky. They didn't know why seasons changed, so they believed in divine cycles of birth and death. The unknown was too intimidating to face as emptiness, so it became someone. It's the same pattern that persists when people say, "God made everything." It's not an explanation, it's a personification of mystery. And mystery personified becomes control. Religion thrives on the comfort of an answer that can't be questioned. Because the moment you ask, "Who made God?" you strip the illusion of authority from the divine. You expose the fragility of its logic. The entire structure of belief depends on stopping inquiry before it reaches that point. This is why so many theologians try to redefine God when pressed. They'll say, "God isn't a being, God is existence itself," or "God is outside time." But these are evasions, not clarifications. Existence itself is not a mind, and outside time is a phrase that has no meaning because the concept of outside already presupposes time. You can't exist in a state where existence itself doesn't apply. These words are philosophical camouflage, designed to sound profound while concealing emptiness. If a concept cannot be defined in a way that distinguishes it from nothing at all, it is not profound. It is meaningless. A God that cannot be described, measured, or differentiated from non-existence isn't mysterious. It's indistinguishable from nothingness. To call that nothing divine adds poetry, not understanding. The human brain evolved to find patterns, to detect agency, because in the wild, seeing intention where there was none was safer than missing it when it mattered. If you heard a rustle in the grass, it was better to imagine a predator that wasn't there than to dismiss one that was. That instinct still drives us. We see purpose where there is only process, meaning where there is only mechanism. The idea of God is the ultimate overreaction of that pattern-seeking impulse. Yet the universe gives us no sign that a mind lies behind it. Its vastness is indifferent. Its laws are not moral. Galaxies collide, stars explode, planets form and die, all without intention. Life appears not as the goal of creation, but as a byproduct of chemistry, fleeting, accidental, self-replicating matter that evolved to ask questions about its own impermanence. And still, we're told to believe this entire cosmic machinery was designed with us in mind, by an infinite being who craves our worship but hides his presence, a being who can create galaxies with a thought, yet demands constant reassurance from creatures made of dust. The logic collapses under its own contradictions. To believe that such a being created the universe is to shrink reality to the scale of human ego. It's to mistake our longing for importance as evidence of divine purpose. But the universe does not bend itself around human emotion. It doesn't need to. Its beauty lies precisely in its indifference, that from a field of chaos, order emerges naturally. From simplicity, complexity arises. From lifelessness, life. The phrase "God made everything" once gave people comfort because they lacked the tools to ask deeper questions. But now, we do have those tools, and the question, "Who made God?" reveals just how hollow that comfort really is. Theologians once claimed the universe could not exist eternally because it would require infinite time to reach the present. But if time itself began with the universe, there was never a before for creation to occur. The question of what caused it presupposes a temporal framework that doesn't apply. Asking what caused the beginning of time is like asking where does the edge of a circle begin? What's more, modern cosmology suggests that nothingness is not the opposite of something. It's unstable. quantum vacuum states can fluctuate, giving rise to energy and matter spontaneously. The universe could very well be a self-contained system that doesn't require an external creator. That doesn't mean we know every detail, but it means invoking a deity adds nothing. Every time science uncovers a mechanism once attributed to the divine, religion retreats, adjusting its definitions to fit the shrinking gaps. The pattern is so consistent, it's almost predictable. The God of the gaps keeps losing territory. And yet, belief persists, not because it's rational, but because it's emotional. Belief in a creator is born not from evidence, but from fear. Fear of nothingness, fear of meaninglessness, fear that existence might have no caretaker. The question, who made God, terrifies believers because it turns that fear back on itself. If even the creator needs an explanation, then perhaps there is no ultimate parent in the sky, only the vast, unparented universe itself. And maybe that's not something to fear, but to respect. Because a reality that exists on its own, without supervision, without design, without divine authority, is a reality truly free. The question, who made God, becomes even more revealing when we look beyond philosophy and into psychology, because belief in a creator isn't just about cosmology, it's about the architecture of the human mind. At its core, religion is an emotional survival strategy. It's how our ancestors coped with uncertainty, fear, and death long before science or medicine existed. When storms destroyed their homes or diseases wiped out their families, they didn't have meteorology or biology to turn to. They had imagination. They personified their fears into beings they could negotiate with. If thunder terrified them, they prayed to it. If crops failed, they offered sacrifices. If death loomed, they invented another world where they'd never die. That instinct, to personify what we don't understand, is still with us. It's not a flaw, it's the residue of evolution. Our brains are wired to seek intention in everything because, in a primitive environment, assuming agency could save your life. The rustling in the bushes might be the wind, but it might also be a predator. Over time, that instinct hardened into a bias, a tendency to over-detect design, even when none exists. And that's where the idea of God flourished, in the fertile soil of uncertainty and fear. When you ask someone why they believe, they rarely begin with evidence. They begin with emotion. I just feel there must be something. I can't accept that this all came from nothing. There has to be a reason we're here. These aren't arguments. They're anxieties wrapped in language. The human brain is uncomfortable with randomness, so it invents purpose. But here's the paradox. The same brain that created the concept of God also insists that God created it. That's like a character in a novel claiming to have written the author. It's a closed loop of self-reference, sustained by the refusal to question its premise. To maintain this illusion, religion had to evolve into more than just belief. It became power. Once the idea of a divine creator existed, someone had to interpret what that creator wanted, and whoever claimed that role gained authority over others. The priest, the prophet, the king, all drew their legitimacy from the same invisible source. God chose me, they said, and no one could disprove it. The concept of an uncreated creator became the foundation of unchallengeable human authority. That's why the question, who made God, isn't just dangerous philosophically, it's subversive politically. It undermines every hierarchy built on divine justification. Because if God is a human invention, then so are the rules, the morals, and the power systems attached to him. When people in ancient civilizations asked questions that threatened this structure, they were silenced, punished, or killed. Not because their questions were foolish, but because they were too powerful. To ask, who made God, was to cut the puppet strings. It was to look beyond the priest, beyond the temple, beyond the myth, and see that the sky was empty. And yet, through centuries, the myth adapted. It shifted its shape as human understanding grew. When astronomy dethroned Earth from the center of the cosmos, religion redefined God as the creator of the whole universe. When biology revealed evolution, God became the designer of the process. When neuroscience began explaining consciousness, God retreated again, this time into the cracks of human subjectivity as the source of morality, or meaning, or love. Every time the walls of ignorance collapse, God slips through the rubble into the remaining darkness, and believers mistake that retreat for transcendence. They call it mystery, but it's camouflage. Language plays a key role in maintaining this illusion. Words like eternal, divine, and infinite sound profound, but are used as shields against scrutiny. When someone says, God is eternal, what they really mean is, I don't know where he came from, and I've stopped trying to find out. The word eternal gives ignorance a halo. Even the phrase God exists is built on a linguistic trap. Existence is something that occupies reality, something that can be observed, defined, or inferred from evidence. But the divine, by definition, sits outside those boundaries. To say God exists is to assert that something exists outside existence itself, a contradiction that only survives because language allows it. If words can be arranged to sound meaningful, people will accept them as truth, even when they describe impossibilities. Philosophers like Ludwig Wittgenstein recognized this long ago. He wrote that many religious statements are not factual claims, but expressions of feeling, like poetry mistaken for science. But when poetry is enforced as truth, it becomes a prison. Still, humans cling to this linguistic illusion because it offers emotional comfort. The idea of an uncreated creator promises that life isn't random, that death isn't final, and that suffering isn't meaningless. It wraps chaos in narrative. It gives the void a face and calls it Father. But when we ask who made God, we tear away that mask. We force belief to stand without its metaphors, and suddenly, it can't. Because a being that exists outside time, space, and causation isn't just mysterious, it's incoherent. It's an idea that cannot exist even conceptually, yet believers are taught to treat it as reality. The irony is that the more we understand about the universe, the less need we have for divine explanation. Yet the more emotionally attached some people become to it. Knowledge threatens comfort, so comfort fights back. The defense isn't logical, it's existential. It's not about protecting God, it's about protecting the self from insignificance. And that's the heart of the matter. The belief in a self-existing God is not an answer to the universe. It's a mirror of our own longing, not to face the possibility that existence itself might be indifferent to us. When people say, there must be a creator, what they often mean is, there must be someone who cares. But the universe doesn't comfort. It doesn't punish or reward. It simply is. And maybe that realization, rather than making life meaningless, gives it its only true meaning. Because meaning born from human consciousness, not divine decree, is meaning we've earned. When we ask, who made God, we don't just challenge the idea of divine creation. We shake the foundation of divine morality. Because if the Creator is uncreated, self-existing, and beyond explanation, then so are his moral laws. They too become arbitrary. And if morality depends on the will of a being whose own origin cannot be explained, then morality itself collapses into subjectivity, wearing the mask of eternity. Religious morality claims to come from above, but morality, when examined honestly, grows from below, from human experience, empathy, and cooperation. It isn't etched in stone, it's carved in our evolution. We are moral not because we were commanded to be, but because our survival required it. Before any god was worshipped, our ancestors already lived in groups. They shared food, cared for offspring, defended one another. Those who cooperated thrived. Those who didn't perished. Empathy wasn't divine. It was adaptive. Over time, it became instinct. When we see someone in pain, our brains mirror it. We flinch because we feel. That reflex existed millions of years before anyone wrote a single verse claiming to know the will of a deity. Religion later hijacked that instinct. It took human compassion, something natural, something evolved, and rebranded it as obedience to divine command. Love your neighbor, it said, as if kindness needed a signature from heaven. But humans loved their neighbors long before Scripture told them to. What religion did was not invent morality, but monopolize it, and it used that monopoly to justify nearly anything. The same holy texts that preach compassion also justify slavery, genocide, and eternal torture, all under the authority of a creator who is supposed to be perfect. If this being made morality, why is that morality indistinguishable from the biases and cruelties of the people who wrote his words? It's because morality never came from him. He came from it. The gods of every civilization mirrored the values and fears of the people who invented them. The Greek gods were impulsive and vain, like the aristocrats who ruled Greece. The Norse gods were violent and proud, like their warriors. The Christian God is jealous and authoritarian, like the ancient kings who used him to justify their power. The uncreated creator is, at heart, a projection of human nature, magnified, deified, and frozen in time. Every moral law ascribed to him is an echo of the moral instincts that created him in the first place. When believers claim that without God there can be no right or wrong, they reveal how fragile their own morality is. Because true morality doesn't depend on fear of punishment or hope of reward. It depends on empathy, the ability to recognize ourselves in others. If goodness exists only because we're afraid of divine wrath, it isn't goodness, it's submission. Think about the moral logic implied by divine command. If an all-powerful being ordered cruelty, would it become good? History says yes, and that's the problem. The moment morality is defined by divine will instead of human empathy, atrocities become sanctified. The Crusades, the Inquisition, witch hunts, holy wars, all justified by the Creator's will. A being without Creator becomes a being without accountability. But when we remove God from the equation, morality doesn't vanish. It deepens. It becomes ours. Instead of asking, what does God want? We ask, what causes harm? What creates well-being? Those are questions we can actually answer. They can evolve with new understanding. They can improve. If morality were fixed in stone, humanity would still live by the laws of Iron Age tribes. But morality evolved with us, which proves it was never divine. The same religious texts that condemn homosexuality also endorse polygamy, slavery, and stoning. Yet even believers now reject most of those commandments, not because a new revelation appeared, but because human empathy outgrew them. Morality rooted in reason and compassion doesn't need a creator to justify it. It only needs consciousness capable of understanding consequences. When we see suffering and choose to relieve it, we become the authors of meaning. We no longer need to imagine a cosmic parent dictating right and wrong. Some might ask, but if there's no God, why should we be good? The answer is both simple and profound, because we know what it means to suffer, because we live together, because the same biology that allows pain allows empathy. Because a moral life doesn't need to be rewarded to be worth living. Religion teaches that morality requires authority, but genuine morality begins when authority is no longer needed. The most moral act is not the one done out of fear, but the one done freely, out of recognition that others feel as deeply as we do. When we ask, who made God? We're not just questioning creation. We're questioning the origin of every moral claim made in His name. Because if the Creator is uncreated, then so are His decrees. They exist without reason, without source, without grounding. But if morality is human, then it has roots. In biology, in empathy, in experience. It has meaning we can touch. The story of morality without God is the story of humanity growing up. It's the story of a species that began by kneeling before the thunder and ended by harnessing electricity. A species that once begged the heavens for answers and later learned to find them within itself. The idea of an unmade maker once gave us comfort, but the idea of a self-made morality gives us dignity. It means that right and wrong are not dictated by an invisible overseer, but discovered by human reason, shaped by compassion, revised by knowledge, and tested by consequence. A God who never had a beginning cannot grow or change. But we can, and that's why morality belongs to us, not to a creator who refuses to explain himself. The claim that God exists outside of time is often used as a last refuge for belief, the point believers retreat to when logic corners them. When asked, who made God, they respond, God doesn't need a creator. He exists outside time. At first it sounds profound, but when you examine it carefully, it collapses into incoherence. What does it mean to exist outside time? Existence itself implies duration. To exist means to be. And being requires time. A timeless existence is as meaningless as motion without space. It's not just impossible to imagine, it's logically self-contradictory. Believers use outside time as a way to excuse the impossibility of a being who creates before the universe begins. But before is already a time word. If time began with the universe, then there was no before in which a God could act. The entire concept of creation presupposes time, a sequence, a cause followed by an effect. Without time, there's no then. Without then, there's no creation. This is why physics doesn't describe the origin of the universe as something that happened before time began, because such a phrase makes no sense. Instead, it studies how space and time themselves emerge from the conditions of the Big Bang. Asking what caused the Big Bang assumes a cause and effect relationship that only exists after time begins. It's like asking what's north of the North Pole. The question misunderstands its own premise. For centuries, the first cause argument has been the cornerstone of theistic philosophy. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause, and that cause is God. But every step of that argument is flawed. First, not everything that begins to exist necessarily has a cause. On the quantum level, we observe phenomena that occur spontaneously, particles appearing and disappearing from quantum fields without identifiable causes. These aren't gaps in knowledge, they're observed realities. Quantum events obey probabilities, not deterministic chains of causation. Reality at its smallest scale isn't built on rigid cause and effect, but on uncertainty. Second, even if we grant that the universe has a cause, there's no justification for jumping from that cause to a conscious, intentional deity. To claim that a cosmic event must have been the act of a personal mind is a leap of imagination, not deduction. There's no evidence that cause and agency are interchangeable. Gravity causes motion, but gravity isn't conscious. Radioactive decay happens without intention. The universe doesn't need a personality to unfold. And third, if we claim that God doesn't require a cause, then the argument collapses on itself. It begins by asserting that everything must have a cause, then ends by declaring that one thing doesn't. Conveniently, the thing we're trying to prove. That's not logic, that's special pleading. The believer tries to solve the infinite regress of causes by arbitrarily inserting a supernatural being at the beginning, as if labeling the unknown with a divine name transforms ignorance into knowledge. But God did it explains nothing. It's a way to stop asking questions while pretending to have answered them. Science, on the other hand, doesn't pretend certainty. It recognizes that the early universe, the first fractions of a second after the Big Bang, remains an open mystery. Cosmologists explore models like quantum gravity, inflation, and cyclic universes. Each is complex, incomplete, but testable. That's the difference. Science is comfortable not knowing yet. Religion cannot tolerate not knowing at all. But what's most interesting is that even if the universe had a beginning, that beginning might not have required a cause in any traditional sense. The equations describing the early universe, such as those developed by Stephen Hawking and James Hartle, suggest that time itself may have curved back on itself. In that case, the universe would have no boundary, no edge, and no temporal starting point. It would be finite but unbounded, like the surface of a sphere. In Hawking's words, the question what happened before the Big Bang is meaningless, because there was no before. In that view, the universe didn't need to be created. It simply exists as a self-contained system governed by physical laws. No external hand is required to light the fuse, because there was no fuse. And even if the laws of physics themselves required explanation, invoking God only pushes the question back a step. Who made those laws? If you say God created them, then what created God's nature? If his nature simply exists without cause, why can't the same be said of the universe? The believer's escape hatch opens only to reveal another door behind it. Some argue that the existence of physical laws implies a lawgiver, but that analogy fails because natural laws aren't commands, they're descriptions. The law of gravity doesn't tell matter how to behave. It describes how matter behaves. It's not an instruction, it's a pattern. Patterns don't need authors. They emerge naturally from the properties of reality itself. The idea of a timeless creator is born not from observation, but from fear. Fear of infinite regress. Fear that existence might not have a reason. Fear that reality might simply be. But simply being is not a weakness of the universe. It's its greatest strength. A self-contained reality requires no external justification. Its existence is the explanation. Religious apologists often accuse non-believers of arrogance for denying the Creator. But what's more arrogant? Accepting that the universe exists without human-like purpose, or insisting that it revolves around a cosmic mind that shares our desires, our biases, and our language. The first is humility before nature. The second is narcissism projected onto infinity. And yet, the idea of God persists, not because it withstands evidence, but because it satisfies emotion. The thought that reality might have no master feels unbearable to those raised to believe that meaning requires ownership. But perhaps meaning is not given from above. Perhaps it's made from within. When we stop asking, who made God, and start asking, why do we need there to be one, the conversation shifts from cosmology to psychology, from the structure of the universe to the structure of belief. When philosophy and science strip away every logical defense of divine creation, what remains isn't reason, it's need. The need for comfort, the need for order, the need for someone, somewhere, to be in control. That's where the idea of God truly lives, not in the stars or the scriptures, but in the architecture of human fear. Every civilization has produced a god, and every god has reflected the psychology of the people who built him. The gods of hunters cared about prey and fertility. The gods of farmers ruled over rain and harvest. The gods of kings were obsessed with obedience and hierarchy. As societies evolved, their gods evolved too. But the underlying impulse stayed the same, to make the unknown bearable. When people say, I believe in God, they're rarely talking about cosmology. They're talking about comfort, the reassurance that existence isn't random, that death isn't final, that suffering has meaning. The idea of an uncreated creator gives emotional symmetry to a chaotic world. It turns uncertainty into purpose, but that same comfort becomes a cage. The belief that everything must have a higher reason turns freedom into dependency. If every event, good or bad, must be part of a plan, then responsibility dissolves. The believer becomes both victim and spectator, interpreting chaos as choreography. If tragedy strikes, it's meant to be. If injustice reigns, it's a test. If cruelty wins, it's God's will. This mindset doesn't explain suffering, it normalizes it. It teaches acceptance where outrage is needed, resignation where action is demanded. The illusion of divine authorship numbs our moral instincts. When people stop asking, why is this happening, and start saying, it must be God's purpose, curiosity dies. And yet, beneath that surrender lies fear. Fear of being alone in an indifferent universe. That fear is ancient. It's the same fear our ancestors felt when they looked up at a sky they couldn't understand. Only now, the mystery isn't thunder or disease. It's the void itself. Modern belief in God isn't just about worship. It's about insulation from existential anxiety. The human mind struggles to accept randomness because randomness feels like meaninglessness. But randomness is simply complexity we haven't fully understood. The universe isn't chaos. It's order without intention. It operates through patterns that don't require purpose to be magnificent. When you release the need for a designer, you don't lose meaning. You gain it. Because meaning becomes something you create, not something you're assigned. When there is no divine script, your choices matter infinitely more. There's no afterlife waiting to fix injustice. No cosmic parent cleaning up your failures. Everything that happens, happens here, in this small window of existence. That realization doesn't drain life of meaning. It electrifies it. But ego resists that truth. The idea of being unplanned feels offensive to it. People want to be chosen, not accidental. They want to be part of a story, not a sequence. That's why the notion of God appeals so deeply. It centers humanity at the heart of creation. The universe becomes a stage, and we, the protagonists. Without that script, the ego feels lost. But that loss is liberation. To exist without divine oversight is to exist authentically. There's no celestial authority dictating what you must believe, love, or fear. The silence of the universe is not emptiness. It's space for freedom. Existentialists like Jean-Paul Sartre understood this. He wrote that when you remove the idea of God, you remove the excuse. There's no one left to blame for what's wrong, and no one left to fix it but us. That realization can feel terrifying at first, but it's also empowering. It means morality, purpose, and progress are in human hands. It means that meaning is something built, not bestowed. And yet, this freedom feels unbearable to many, because it comes with full accountability. It's easier to imagine a divine overseer who commands goodness than to accept that goodness is a human responsibility. That's why even intelligent people cling to God, not out of ignorance, but out of longing. They mistake dependency for humility and freedom for chaos. Psychologically, belief in an uncreated creator functions as a coping mechanism against existential dread. Studies show that when people are reminded of their mortality, belief in God tends to increase. Death anxiety triggers faith, not because faith solves it, but because it soothes it. The image of a timeless being watching over us anesthetizes the mind against the incomprehensibility of non-existence. But this comfort comes at a cost. It freezes intellectual growth. It replaces inquiry with certainty. Instead of asking, "What is true?" believers ask, "What must I defend to feel safe?" Every unanswered question becomes a threat. Every new discovery, an intrusion. The mind that could expand becomes a fortress guarding its own illusions. To ask, "Who made God?" is to break the seal on that fortress. It's to open the gate between comfort and truth. Because once you see that the Creator's immunity from creation is an illusion, the hierarchy collapses, the divine ceases to be sacred, and reality, for the first time, becomes enough. Reality doesn't need a reason to exist. It doesn't need permission to be. The beauty of it lies precisely in that self-sufficiency. To know that the universe exists without divine intention is to witness something astonishing: the emergence of consciousness from chaos, life from matter, thought from stardust. It's not a miracle, it's evolution, and evolution doesn't require an author, only possibility. So, the real question isn't who made God, it's why did we need to? Why did our species invent an unmade maker, a being beyond causation, only to fill the silence of our own uncertainty? The answer, perhaps, is that the unknown felt too vast to face alone. But we are not alone, not because a deity watches over us, but because we watch over each other. Our collective consciousness, our ability to think, love, and understand, that's where transcendence truly lives. The universe may not have a plan, but we can create one. It may not care, but we can choose to. The absence of divine design doesn't erase meaning. It hands it to us. When you finally strip away the mythology, the fear, the poetry, and the dogma, what remains is the most humbling truth imaginable. Existence needs no maker. Reality is not a product of intention. It is the unfolding of possibility. And that realization changes everything. For thousands of years, humans were taught to see themselves as guests in someone else's creation. Every sunrise was a gift, every law a command, every mystery a test. The world was framed as property, designed, owned, and governed by a divine landlord. But the truth, far from diminishing life, does the opposite. It returns ownership to where it belongs. The universe is not borrowed, it is shared. It is not a stage built for us, but a field we are part of, born from it, made of it, destined to return to it. When we ask, "Who made God?" we don't just question religion, we reclaim reality. Because the moment you realize that the universe is self-existing, you stop worshiping and start wondering. You stop kneeling and start observing. Awe no longer requires obedience. It becomes participation. Look around you. Every atom in your body was forged in a star that exploded billions of years ago. The calcium in your bones, the iron in your blood, the carbon in your cells. All of it was born from cosmic violence. You are literally made of the universe's memory. The cosmos didn't create you on purpose. It became you through chance, chemistry, and time. You are not the result of design. You are the expression of reality's endless ability to organize itself. That understanding is not cold, it's liberating. Because it means we belong here, not because someone decided it, but because it could not have been otherwise. Out of countless possible configurations of matter, this one, you, alive, aware, able to ask questions, happened. Against all odds, without divine permission. When you remove the idea of a creator, life becomes infinitely more precious. Every moment counts because no eternal afterlife is waiting. Every act of kindness matters because no cosmic judge will balance the scales. Every love, every loss, every choice, they are not preludes to eternity, but the entire story itself. The concept of an uncreated God shrinks meaning to servitude. Your life becomes a test, your actions mere obedience, your purpose defined for you. But when you realize there is no master, you become responsible for creating meaning. And that responsibility is sacred in a way religion never could be. Some say without God, everything is permitted, But the opposite is true. Without God, nothing is predetermined. Freedom is total. We are not pawns on a divine chessboard. We are players in a vast, self-organizing universe. What we do here shapes the only eternity that matters. The ripple of consequences we leave behind in others, in culture, in the environment, in memory. The question, who made God, ultimately dismantles the illusion of cosmic hierarchy. It shows that the chain of causation ends not with a person, but with process, not with will, but with existence itself. The universe doesn't need a mind to sustain it. It sustains itself through laws that emerge from its own nature. That is not chaos, it's self-consistency. And yet, many people fear a reality without a God because they mistake absence for emptiness. But absence is not emptiness, it's potential. It's the space where meaning can be written by those who dare to think, to create, to love without supervision. The ancient question, who made God, isn't just a philosophical curiosity. It's the beginning of intellectual freedom. It's the moment when humanity stopped whispering to the sky and started listening to itself. Science, philosophy, and reason are not enemies of wonder. They are its evolution. They transform awe from submission into understanding. When you gaze at the night sky, you don't need to imagine a being who painted it. It's enough to know that the light reaching you left its star before life began on Earth. That the same laws governing those stars govern the thoughts forming in your brain right now. That realization, that connection, is deeper than any scripture. It is not worship, it is awareness. The universe doesn't ask for your faith, it asks for your attention. It doesn't demand devotion, it invites discovery. It doesn't promise eternal life. It gives you this one, brief, fragile, extraordinary, and asks what you will do with it. So, when someone says, God has always existed, you can gently ask, then why can't existence itself? The difference between those two ideas is the difference between mythology and maturity, between needing a parent and accepting the universe as it is, uncreated, unowned, ungoverned, yet breathtakingly real. And if that truth feels unsettling at first, it's only because it removes the walls that once made you feel safe. But beyond those walls lies everything. Reality in its raw form, not dressed in myth or miracle, but alive in the smallest particle and the largest galaxy. We are not children of a divine plan. We are fragments of an eternal process, the cosmos becoming conscious of itself, however briefly. There's poetry in that, and it doesn't need a God to be beautiful. So the question, who made God, ends not in confusion, but in clarity. It reveals that the Creator is the creation, that the myths we made to explain the world were reflections of our own wonder, our own ignorance, our own need to belong. But now, belonging requires no deity. Existence is enough, and maybe that's the most profound truth of all, that we, tiny beings on a small planet in an endless expanse, are not waiting for meaning to be handed down from the heavens. We are building it together in the only universe there is. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you listening from? And what time is it there right now? Share your thoughts in the comments. What does existence mean to you when it stands on its own, without a creator?